My name is Emily Carter. I'm 31, the youngest daughter, and I was just there to listen. I thought maybe there'd be something left for me. But no, my name wasn't mentioned once. They all clapped when Dad said it's all staying in the family. I smiled and waited, because he forgot who owns the final piece. They didn't expect me to show up. Thanksgiving at my parents' house had always been a grand production, the kind where crystal glasses clinked even before the first bite and seating charts were whispered about like family secrets. I parked a little further down the street like always. My car, 10 years old and missing the glossy shine of Jason's BMW, didn't belong in the circular driveway anyway. When I walked in, no one turned their head. The dining room was glowing with the warm amber of chandelier light filled with laughter conversation and the scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon pie. Jason's voice boomed from the far end of the table. "Linda?" His wife clutched a wine glass and giggled at something he said. My mother hovered near the kitchen, hair perfectly curled pearls in place. She glanced at me, a tight smile. No words. Emily, my dad, finally said, not moving from his seat. "You're here. Not welcome." Not even a nod toward the empty seat near the end. I found it myself. I sat quietly as a cousin scooted their chair away slightly, as if my presence had shifted the air. No one asked me about my work. No one noticed I brought dessert. No one touched it. I looked around and let the silence inside me grow. Every now and then, someone would mention Grandpa. He had passed 3 months ago. A silence would follow not out of mourning, but calculation. Everyone knew the will would be read soon. Jason had already hinted he'd take over the lakeside cabin, the one Grandpa used to say was where real memories lived. No one asked what Grandpa left for me. They assumed the answer. The family business was still running barely, and Jason had stepped in as the golden son. My mother once told me, "You were always a bit more artistic." Grandpa was practical. I remember nodding, then tucking away the sting like a loose thread under the rug. After dinner, while plates clinked and pie was served, my father leaned forward and announced, "By the way, the lawyer finalized the reading. It'll be next Thursday. Shouldn't take long." Jason smiled. Linda whispered something to him. He chuckled and looked straight at me. "You might want to skip it, Em. These things can be anticlimactic." I smiled, lips closed. My hands stayed folded on my lap. That was the thing with Jason, he always liked his victories announced before they were even real. The night ended like all others. I said goodbye to Mom. She barely looked up from the dishes. Dad gave me a nod from the couch. Jason didn't bother. As I walked out, I heard the door close a little too quickly behind me. The chill of November air hit me sharper than expected, but I didn't shiver. I just kept walking. In my bag was a folder. Grandpa's handwriting was on the front. It wasn't heavy, but it carried weight, and no one, not even Jason, had asked what was in it. Grandpa's folder wasn't thick, just a few pages slipped inside a manila sleeve worn at the edges like it had been handled too many times. I didn't open it that night. I didn't need to. I had already read it twice the week before when the lawyer Mr. Mitchell called and said he asked me to give this to you privately before the reading. He specifically said not to tell your parents, Mr. Mitchell added. I remembered sitting there in his office, my hands shaking slightly as I took the folder. I hadn't cried. I didn't feel triumphant. Just a quiet hum of something I hadn't felt in years, recognition. At home, my small apartment felt colder than usual. I poured myself a cup of tea and placed the folder on the table like it might shift or vanish if I looked away. I had sat at that table when I applied to art school, when I opened rejection letters, when I filed for my first freelance license. My father had called all of it a hobby that got out of hand. But Grandpa had known better. He used to visit my studio once in a while, saying little, just walking among the canvases. Once he stayed until I finished a piece. He didn't say it was good. He didn't need to. He just pointed at a corner of the painting and said, "You see that? That's why you can't quit." I didn't know then that he'd been planning something. The folder didn't contain millions, not in cash anyway. It wasn't that kind of inheritance. What it held was a stake, his share, in a company he had quietly built with a partner before retiring. A company that had been slowly expanding into digital media. He left that stake to me. No one else even knew it existed. He called it my second legacy, written in his neat square handwriting. I didn't tell anyone. I went to work like usual, sketching layouts for a local firm, answering emails and spending evenings at the studio. But inside, a quiet readiness was forming. The next few days moved in slow motion. Family text threads lit up with chatter about the will reading. Jason joked about the grand reveal. Linda sent a photo of a new handbag captioned "Pre-celebration gift to myself." No one copied me in those threads. I only saw the screenshots later, forwarded by a cousin who still spoke to me sometimes. Thursday arrived gray and windless. I wore black not out of mourning, but because it made me feel grounded. I arrived early at the lawyer's office. Mr. Mitchell greeted me with a polite nod, his eyes lingering a second longer than usual. They're in the conference room. When I entered, they were already seated. Jason was at the head of the table, legs crossed, a smirk on his face. My mother wore a navy coat and pearl earrings. My father was flipping through a small notepad, pretending to read something. Linda had her phone out, probably recording the moment for herself. No one said hello. I took a seat near the end again. Not the last chair this time, just close enough to hear, far enough to be overlooked. Mr. Mitchell began. Thank you all for coming. As you know, we are here today to go through the final wishes of Mr. Harold Carter. He unfolded a few papers and began reading. Jason received the cabin. No surprise. My mother got a vintage piano Grandpa had cherished. She had always hated how out of tune it was. My father was handed a collection of rare war medals Grandpa had collected over decades. He'll probably sell them, I thought. Linda got nothing directly, but Jason grinned in a way that said, "What's mine is hers." Then there was a pause, and lastly, Mr. Mitchell said, "Before I move to the final clause, there is one addendum. Miss Emily Carter has requested to pass along a document at this time." All heads turned toward me. I stood up, slowly walked to the front of the room, and placed Grandpa's folder on the table beside Mr. Mitchell. "He asked me to give this to you when the time was right," I said, my voice quiet, but clear. Jason squinted. My mother blinked rapidly. My father stopped flipping his notepad. The room didn't go silent. Not yet. That part came later. Mr. Mitchell opened the folder carefully, as though he already knew the weight of what was inside. He skimmed the first page briefly before speaking. "This," he said, lifting his gaze toward my parents and brother, "is a sealed supplement to Mr. Harold Carter's primary will. It details a personal allocation of shares and business assets, made entirely at Mr. Carter's discretion and without the knowledge or influence of the family." Jason leaned forward. "Wait, business assets?" Mr. Mitchell nodded. "A silent partnership he retained in a media company merged 6 years ago under a new name, Harper Row Media." I could feel their confusion bloom. "I thought he sold everything before retiring," my mother whispered almost to herself. "He did," I said softly, "except this one. He called it his quiet bet." Mr. Mitchell turned to me. "Miss Carter, as per his instruction, you are the sole beneficiary of his 47% stake in that company, control rights included." Jason blinked. "That company sponsors half the state's public art initiatives." "Yes," I said, "and their new CEO just started last quarter." My father's face began to pale. Linda looked up from her phone for the first time. The silence in the room now was different, not just still, but shifting. Heavy. Mr. Mitchell continued, his tone steady. "This supplement was signed 6 months before Mr. Carter's passing. It was filed under a separate legal trust. The value of the stake, based on current market estimates, is substantial." "How substantial?" Jason snapped. "North of 12 million, Mr. Mitchell replied, "though that's only liquid valuation." No one spoke. Even the wall clock seemed louder than usual. I didn't gloat. I didn't explain. I just sat back down. That moment, those few seconds after, were the beginning of something I hadn't expected, not just vindication, but peace. They weren't angry. Not yet. They were confused. Because in their version of the world, I was always the outsider, the daughter who painted too much, spoke too softly, and didn't chase status the way they did. But in Grandpa's version, I mattered. Quietly, but entirely. Mr. Mitchell closed the folder and folded his hands. "There are no further comments to be made," he said. I stood up and nodded politely. "Thank you." As I walked out of the room, no one followed. Behind me, chairs shifted, but no voices rose. The door clicked shut, and in that quiet, I didn't feel small. I felt heard. The morning of the will reading. I arrived at the family house earlier than expected. I parked on the street instead of pulling into the circular driveway, a habit I'd learned over the years, a quiet strategy to avoid being noticed too soon. From outside, I could already hear voices. Jason's laugh, my mother's brisk instructions, someone setting glasses down too forcefully on the dining table. I stepped inside and was greeted not by warmth but by absence. No one looked up, not even when I walked past the kitchen. Linda finally noticed. "Oh," she said, pausing mid-scroll on her phone. "You're here." "Good morning," I replied gently. She offered a half-smile, the kind you give to someone you forgot you'd invited. "You look rested." It wasn't a compliment, just a placeholder. I hung my coat by the door and moved toward the living room where Dad was talking to Jason about logistics, how long the lawyer would take, whether snacks were necessary. "She doesn't eat much anyway," Jason muttered, not bothering to whisper. I didn't reply. I sat on the armrest of the farthest chair legs, crossed notebook in hand. I wasn't journaling, I just needed something to hold, something that reminded me I existed. The tension in the room wasn't new, it was patterned. Years of family gatherings had trained me to anticipate the subtle cues, the dismissive sighs, the exclusion from toasts, the constant omission from photo arrangements. I was never the scandal, never the disappointment. I was simply excess, something extra that didn't quite fit but didn't quite offend. This time, though, the stakes felt sharper. "Dad," Jason said suddenly, "do you think Mitchell's going to make a scene out of this?" My father looked up from his tea. "He's a lawyer, Jason. That's what they do. Read papers, act official." Jason scoffed. "Right. But just to be safe, you already told him we're splitting everything 3 ways." "Yeah." The silence that followed wasn't hesitation. It was calculation. My mother glanced at me, then back to her coffee. "We told him what mattered," she said. I breathed in slowly and flipped a page in my notebook, though there was nothing written on the previous one. Linda stood and adjusted the throw pillows on the couch like we were hosting a brunch instead of a legal appointment. "I just hope it's quick," she said. "We have dinner reservations at 6. That's when it happened. Jason walked past me to the bar cart, poured himself something amber into a glass, then paused. He turned toward me, glass in hand. "You know, he said I wasn't sure if you'd even show." I met his gaze. "Why wouldn't I?" He shrugged. "Well, it's not like you were that close to Grandpa. Not like the rest of us." "The rest of us?" I smiled faintly. "I visited him last spring." Jason raised a brow. "That's cute." There was no anger in his tone, just possession. He was already sure of the outcome, already confident that I'd walk away empty-handed and that he'd pat me on the shoulder like a generous victor. I turned to my father. "Did Grandpa leave instructions?" Mr. Carter didn't look at me when he answered. "Only for the lawyer. Everything else is just formalities." "Right." My mother chimed in with a sharp, cheerful tone. "We just want things to stay simple. Grandpa wouldn't want drama." I could have laughed. Grandpa, the man who once faked a heart attack to get out of a birthday speech, hated drama, but I said nothing. I just closed my notebook and placed it on my lap. Their rhythm was too rehearsed, the script too clean. I knew this moment wasn't just about money, it was about order. In their minds, Jason would get the lion's share. Linda would receive tokens of status. My parents would keep the estate running as always, and I would leave with a polite hug and an even politer lie about how it was never about the inheritance. What they didn't realize was that silence in the right context isn't submission. It's preparation. By the time Mr. Mitchell arrived, the house had settled into a brittle kind of stillness, the kind of quiet where words had already done the damage and silence was just waiting to pick over the remains. He entered with his briefcase tucked under one arm, a navy overcoat draped neatly across his other. My parents both stood to greet him, hands outstretched, voices overly bright. Jason chimed in like an eager intern. Linda, perched perfectly on the love seat, offered her signature pageant smile. I stayed seated. Mr. Mitchell nodded toward me. His tone was neutral, but I caught a faint pause, like he wasn't expecting me to be seated so far from the others. I gave a soft nod in return, not moving an inch. They offered him coffee. He declined. He asked to use the study for privacy. My father insisted the living room was fine. We're all family, no secrets here. No secrets. Just exclusion dressed in charm. Mitchell took the center seat, unbuckled his briefcase, and retrieved a single manila folder. My mother's eyes followed it with a precision usually reserved for diamond appraisals. He cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, he began, addressing my father formally. Before I proceed with the reading, I was instructed to confirm the presence of all parties listed in the will. Jason chuckled, already smug. That's us, Mitchell. You've got the Carters all lined up. Mitchell didn't look up from the paper. Jason Carter present, Jason said, raising his glass. Linda Carter. That's me, she chirped, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. Mr. and Mrs. Carter. Yes, my father said confidently. My mother offered a graceful nod. Mitchell's gaze moved across the room until it landed on me. Emily Carter. My parents visibly tensed. It was subtle, a twitch in Dad's jaw, a tightening in Mom's posture, but I saw it. I answered with only a nod. Present, Mitchell confirmed. He flipped the page. Jason leaned over and muttered something into Linda's ear. She covered a grin with her fingertips. I heard the word formality somewhere in the whisper. Mitchell didn't flinch. He continued with Grandpa's opening letter. It was brief, direct. A thank you for our presence, a reminder that legacy is measured not in wealth, but in how one's values are remembered. Jason rolled his eyes at that. Then Mitchell got to the list. To my grandson, Jason Carter. Jason sat up straighter. A sum of $20,000 and the watch I wore on my wedding day. Jason blinked. That's it. Mitchell did not respond. To Linda Carter, he went on a collection of first edition books and my grandmother's brooch. Linda's lips parted slightly as if she wanted to interrupt, but didn't know what to say. To Mr. and Mrs. Carter. My mother adjusted her scarf, a smile preloading at the corners of her mouth. I leave the remaining furniture and household items currently on loan at their residence. There was a pause, a beat too long. What my father asked, voice dipping just slightly below his usual control. Mitchell turned the page again. And finally, he said, voice even and steady, to my granddaughter, Emily Carter. The room stiffened. I leave the entirety of my financial estate, including all liquid and investment assets, ownership of the Carter family business, and full rights to the property on Hollow Creek. Silence. Complete. Utter. Jason's jaw dropped. My mother's hand, mid-reach toward her teacup, stopped. Linda blinked 3 times in rapid succession. I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't gloat. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I'd brought. Mitchell looked at it, then nodded with faint recognition. You held on to the original copy, he asked. I nodded once. Good, he said. It saves us the mailing delay. My father stood up slowly. This must be a mistake. Mitchell didn't even look at him. It's signed, notarized, and witnessed. There are no alternate versions. Jason started to laugh, but it came out as a scoff. You're telling me Grandpa left the business to her? She never even worked there. Linda added, eyes wide. Mitchell's gaze finally met mine. Mr. Carter said she understood the company better than anyone, and more importantly, she understood him. I didn't blink. No one spoke. My mother tried to recover. There must be a codicil, something else. There is not, Mitchell said calmly. I placed the folder on the coffee table and stood. I'll leave this here, I said quietly, in case you want to look it over again. No one moved. No one told me to stop. No one dared. As I turned to leave, I heard the faint clatter of a spoon falling onto the saucer, and still no one said a word. I didn't walk out in a rush. That wasn't the point. Instead, I moved slowly, measured, as if I had all the time in the world. The same way they used to leave me behind when I was little and couldn't tie my shoes fast enough. Only now they were the ones left sitting speechless, watching me. The hallway felt narrower than usual. Or maybe the silence from the living room just pressed against the walls, stretching the air too tight. Halfway to the door, I paused at the side table where Grandpa's picture sat. It was the one of him in the backyard, arms wide, Jason hoisted on one shoulder. I wasn't in the photo. I remember the day. It was the 4th of July and I had the flu. They told me to stay inside so I wouldn't ruin the barbecue. Grandpa had brought me soup later that night when no one was looking. I touched the frame lightly, then turned the photo down. Behind me, no one had followed. Their voices didn't call out, not in protest, not in anger, not even in denial. Because what could they say? The truth, once spoken aloud and sealed in a folder, didn't leave room for arguments. I reached the front door, pulled it open, and stepped outside. The chill bit into my sleeves, but it was clean. Bracing. I exhaled, a long, steady breath, then walked to my car without looking back. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove. Not to anywhere in particular, just through town. Past the elementary school Jason and I used to walk to, past the diner my mom used to meet her friends at when she needed a break from parenting. At some point, I stopped by the old building that used to house the original Carter Tool and Supply. It was shut down years ago when Dad insisted on a sleek new headquarters in the city. The old place was boarded up now, a for sale sign leaning askew in the grass. But the sign was faded. No one had made offers in years. The property wasn't on any broker's active list because Grandpa never intended to sell it. He was waiting. And now, the deed was mine. That night, I returned to my apartment and placed the manila folder on my kitchen table. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. Instead, I made tea, sat in the quiet, and listened to the old pipes hum faintly behind the walls. My phone buzzed once, Jason's name. I didn't answer. The message came through a second later. "We need to talk. This isn't over." I read it twice, then set the phone face down. The next morning, I drafted a simple email to Mr. Mitchell, confirmed receipt of all documents. "Thank you for honoring his wishes. I will be meeting with the financial advisor this week. Please forward remaining legal steps regarding transfer of ownership. Emily Carter." I signed it. There was something final in that motion, not an ending, but a recentering. Like the room had shifted and I was finally standing in the middle. Later that afternoon, as I sat at my desk reviewing the ownership breakdown of the Carter Company, I saw the section labeled Minority Stakeholders. My father's name wasn't there. Jason's neither. Grandpa had restructured everything months ago. Quietly, deliberately. I ran my fingers along the page and stopped at the signature at the bottom. Gerald Carter. Right below it, dated 3 months before he passed, was one line in his handwriting. She was always the one who listened. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. I closed the folder. That night I slept with the windows open. For the first time in years, I didn't dream of being left out. The day of the will reading arrived on a Thursday. It wasn't marked with drama or black suits, just a quiet gray morning, the kind where clouds sit low and everything feels a bit slower. I wore navy, not because it made a statement, but because it didn't. Mr. Mitchell's office was on the second floor of a modest brick building downtown. The carpet in the waiting area was a muted beige, and the coffee smelled faintly burnt, comfortably impersonal. I arrived 10 minutes early, but my parents and Jason were already seated inside the conference room. Dad sat at the head, leaning back like it was his right. Mom flipped through a glossy magazine she clearly wasn't reading. Jason, in his crisp blazer, was tapping away at his phone. No one looked up when I entered. No one greeted me. I didn't announce myself. I simply nodded once to Mr. Mitchell, who gave me a quiet smile in return, then took a seat at the far end of the table opposite Dad. The manila folder was already on the table, the same one I had returned to Mr. Mitchell last week after confirming everything. The same one none of them knew I had ever seen. "Shall we begin?" Mr. Mitchell's voice was calm, measured. My father answered before anyone else could. "Of course. I assume this will be straightforward. Jason takes over the estate and will manage what remains." Mr. Mitchell gave a slight, unreadable smile. "Actually, Mr. Carter, I believe you'll want to listen carefully." There was a pause, a long one. He flipped the folder open. What followed was a list, not rushed, not dramatic, just fact. Grandpa had allocated a charitable donation to a veterans fund. He'd set aside a trust for a woman named Ruth who'd taken care of him the last few months. My mother's eyebrow twitched at that. Jason was left with a classic car, one that hadn't run since the early 2000s. My father leaned forward. And the company, Carter Tools, the properties. Mr. Mitchell turned a page. All business assets, intellectual property, and primary real estate holdings have been legally transferred to Emily Carter, effective immediately. The room stopped breathing. My mother blinked. Jason froze mid-swipe on his phone. Dad's mouth parted, but no sound came out. I didn't move. I didn't gloat. I kept my hands folded in my lap. Mr. Mitchell continued. Your father, Gerald Carter, made these amendments 3 months before his passing. He wrote, and I quote, "Emily sees what others miss. She listens. She leads without noise." Silence. Until my father laughed sharp and dry. This is ridiculous. She's never run a company. She's a silent partner for the last year, Mr. Mitchell interrupted. Mr. Carter had been transitioning ownership gradually. She has already met with the board under his direction. The documentation is all in place. Jason slammed his phone on the table. You knew I turned to him slowly. He asked me to learn, so I did. I stood not abruptly, just enough to shift the energy. I believe that covers everything I said, turning to Mr. Mitchell. He nodded. Unless there are objections. My father looked as if he wanted to stand to shout, but he didn't. He stayed seated. My mother reached out as if to say something but let her hand drop. Jason stared at the table like it might rewrite itself. I walked out. Behind me, no one followed. I didn't go straight home after leaving the law office. Instead, I walked to the small cafe 2 blocks away, the one Grandpa and I used to sit in on slow Sunday mornings sipping lukewarm coffee and talking about things that mattered and things that didn't. I ordered black coffee, no sugar, just like he liked it. As I sat by the window, the weight of what had just happened didn't hit me all at once. It arrived slowly, like steam rising off the surface of the cup, quiet, consistent, undeniable. I didn't feel victorious. I felt still. From the cafe, I watched the traffic flow past, watched a woman adjust her daughter's backpack on the sidewalk, watched an old man feeding birds with a kind of patience that seemed foreign in the world I'd just stepped out of. No one knew what had just shifted, no headlines, no applause, but I knew, and more than that, they knew. My phone buzzed. Jason! I let it ring. Then it buzzed again, this time, a text. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a full minute before locking it again. No response. It buzzed once more, this time from Mom. We didn't know. Please come to dinner tonight. We need to talk. That phrase. We need to talk. How many times had I been told that only to be met with correction, redirection, or silence? The difference now was I didn't need to answer. That evening, I did go home, to my apartment. Not the family house. I walked in, kicked off my shoes, and fed my cat Willow, who greeted me with her usual disdainful meow, followed by a headbutt to my knee. The familiar weight of her curling beside me on the couch reminded me that some things remain unshaken. I didn't reply to the texts. I didn't need to. By morning, the news had started to spread. Not headlines, just whispers. One board member emailed to congratulate me, CCing others. Another forwarded a newsletter Grandpa had drafted months ago with my name already listed as future managing partner. People weren't shocked. They were nodding, as if this had always been part of the plan. And maybe it had been, just not theirs. Mid-afternoon, Mr. Mitchell called. Everything all right? He asked, voice gentle. Yes, I replied. They're adjusting. He paused. Gerald was proud of you, Emily. He didn't say it often, but he didn't need to. He showed it. I smiled faintly. Thank you. That means more than I can say. Before hanging up, he added, Let them come to you now. I knew what he meant, and I wasn't in a rush. Later that week, I returned to Grandpa's office. It hadn't been touched much, his old leather chair still slightly askew, the photo of him with me at age 12 still on the shelf. I sat there for a moment, running my fingers over the desk edge, grounding myself. Then the door opened behind me. It was my mother. She hesitated at the threshold, not quite ready to step in. I wasn't sure if you'd be here, she said. I wasn't either, I replied without turning around. She came in slow, cautious, like the room belonged to someone else now, and in many ways it did. I found an old letter your grandfather wrote, she said, placing an envelope on the desk beside me. It was addressed to you, but he never mailed it. I glanced at the envelope, then back at her. She looked tired, not just in the physical sense, but like someone who had spent years building a version of reality that had just been dismantled. Emily, her voice wavered. I don't know how we got here. I don't know how I let it happen. I didn't speak. Not out of anger, but because there was nothing I needed to say. She continued, Your father. He doesn't know what to do. Jason's furious. But me, I'm just trying to understand. I finally turned to her. I didn't do this to hurt anyone, I said. I just stopped waiting for someone else to see me. She nodded slowly, her eyes glassy. I know, she whispered. And I'm sorry. I looked back down at the envelope. I'll read it later, I said. She stood there a second longer, then left. The click of the door behind her was soft but final. A few days later, I stood in the main conference room of the firm, my firm now. The plaque on the door had already been replaced Everest Holdings, Executive Office. My name, not Grandpa's, was etched beneath it. I didn't ask for a celebration, and thankfully, no one organized one. But word had spread. Quiet congratulations passed through firm-wide emails and short nods in the hallway. No one dared say much, yet the shift was palpable. It wasn't about power, it was about presence. I was no longer invisible. That afternoon, I received one more visitor, Jason. He didn't schedule an appointment. He just walked in. Got a minute? He asked, standing at the door, unsure whether to step forward. I looked up from the folder I was reviewing and gestured toward the chair across from me. You're here. You might as well sit. He did stiffly. Look, I don't know what to say, he started. I didn't see this coming. I know, I said, keeping my tone even. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Did he? Was this your plan all along? No, I replied simply. But it was his. Jason looked away, jaw clenched. He left you the lake house, I added. And the trust fund stays. Nothing was taken from you. He shook his head. That's not the point, Emily. The point is you were quiet. You never pushed. And now suddenly I was never loud enough to be a threat. I finished for him, eyes meeting his. He looked startled. I was never competing, Jason, I continued. I was just doing the work. Grandpa saw that. He was silent. I'm not here to argue, I said gently, and I'm not here to rub anything in. But you asked if I had a minute, and now you're using it to look for where I went wrong. He stood up abruptly. I guess I just don't know who you are anymore. I nodded. Maybe you never did. He left without another word. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to chase, explain, or mend. Later that week, I finally opened the letter Grandpa had written. It was short. Emily. Some things are taught, others are observed. You did both. And when the time came, you didn't need to announce it. You simply arrived. Love always, Grandpa. I read it twice, then tucked it into the back pocket of my journal. He had always seen me not as the baby of the family, not as the quiet one in the corner, but as someone who didn't need noise to matter. The last Sunday of the month, I returned to the family house. They had invited me cautiously. Dinner was already set when I arrived. Mom opened the door with a small, unsure smile. Dad stayed seated at the table. Jason wasn't there. The air was tense but no longer sharp. It felt like the beginning of something unsteady but honest. I took my seat silently. No one made a speech. There was no grand apology. But when Mom passed me the mashed potatoes, her hand lingered a moment too long. When Dad asked if I wanted more wine, his voice was softer than I remembered. And when the room fell quiet for just a second, no one rushed to fill it with noise. That was enough for now. As I left that evening, Mom walked me to the door. Emily, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, thank you for coming. I nodded. Thank you for asking. She opened her mouth like she might say more, but instead she reached out and gave my hand a gentle squeeze. I stepped outside. The evening air was cool, the street quiet. Behind me, the porch light flicked off. I didn't turn back. I didn't need to. The door clicked shut, not with finality but with quiet recognition. And for the first time in a long time, I felt exactly where I was meant to be. Some things aren't said at the table. They're felt in the pause between sentences, in the silence after a name is finally spoken with care. She never raised her voice. She never fought for space. She simply showed up again and again until the room had no choice but to make room for her. Not because she asked, but because she belonged.